Kevin Lyman. This is my co-host, Tony Arakia. What have you been doing this week?
This week, I have been back to work. I'm working on some really exciting projects that I'm not supposed to talk about, but they're so cool.
And we are back to school this week. We're going back on campus.
Yeah, my kid's back to school. I'm back to work. My wife's back at LAUSD. What's happening out there in the world? We have some friends out over this weekend right now at Splash House, right? You know that big, it's an AEG event, right?
Yeah, it's a big AEG pool party.
I think it was last weekend and this weekend.
And I know there's a shortage. You've been hearing about the shortage of chlorine. I hope they have enough chlorine to put in that pool each evening.
I was going to ask you, Kevin, would you get in those pools? Would you really consider
I did talk to someone once who worked at one of those pools, like the pool maintenance guy there, and they go quadruple the chlorine after those events. It's like 40 gallons of chlorine.
Yeah, but I guess after a certain amount of drinks, it really just doesn't matter that much anymore.
You just stand there and pee. It's just like kids used to do it. Like I used to. This brings up a funny story, Tony, because Warped was sponsored all the time, and I'd have to go to sometimes. My partner and agent Daryl Eaton. I think maybe he took some of the things I said too literally. So I said, "Hey, Daryl, it's really cool. I just made a sponsorship of the tour with Depends."
Oh, God.
And he's like,
"Are you kidding?"
He's like, "What?" And I go, "Yeah, it's really probably the most brilliant sponsorship we ever did on Warped Tour with Depends. It was like kids could just wear them in front of the barricade and never lose their spot. You get
That's gross.
You get off the bus in the morning, and everyone's looking for that outhouse, one that's actually functioning. But the guy that's sitting there drinking his coffee, smiling, he's got his Depends on. So I had him going for a while on that, where he actually was. Do you think you maybe took this a little too far? Do you think you took the sponsorship thing a little too far? And then I had to let him down that it wasn't true.
And you know what? I think this is what spawned this next topic that we're going to talk about. This show is about side stages. I think side stages came about because everybody was holding their spot so hard on the main stage that they thought, hey, maybe we should build tell us about what side stage is all about, Kevin.
What happened was, and it was one of those things where, we started out with Warped Tour with 2 stages, and then we kind of went to 4 stages. Then we went, up to about 7. Ernie Ball was a legitimate stage, the Ernie Ball stage, and that one ran the Ernie Ball Battle of Bands. That was fantastic, and I'm still pushing to get Sterling and Brian and all that crew to do an episode with us. It'll be really interesting. But we would do 6 to 8 bands a day every day. Were local bands coming and playing on that stage,
and that's cool. What blows me away, and when I'm talking about the as it progressed, there were stages that popped up that you had nothing to do with.
Well, in a lot of ways, no. And that's what I had to learn. This is where I learned the word no. And it came after one of our most successful shows ever on Warped Tour. We played down where the new Bank Stadium is down in downtown LA. It used to be the LA Sports Arena.
Yep.
And we took that whole big parking lot. It was a big show for LA. We weren't splitting it between Pomona and Ventura. We were doing one big show in LA. It was 38,000 people came to that show. It was crazy. One-day show. A few things happened that day. One that the production manager for the promoter, which was Golden Voice, forgot to order fence. So it was one of those things where I had to pull it off. Like all the kids were lining up, and I'm going, "Where's?" And literally they're scrambling, like the fence truck's coming, and I've got like yellow tape holding back this giant crowd, and everyone was so cool about it.
Oh, that's great.
They kind of just walked through it, but everyone was cool. But at the end of that day, I realized that we had 16 stages.
What?
And we only had 7 legitimate ones. So there was picnic tables, there was road cases, there was plywood on the floor. But the side stages started early on, and some of them grew, and then they became sponsored.
So when you say grew, these were stages that weren't your stages. And not only did they just show up at this one show, they started following the tour.
Legitimately got to the point where there was like sponsored stages that they just we gave them space. We gave them maybe some truck space once we figured it out. We kind of helped a little bit.
And you were cool about this. You're like, this sounds great. Come on along. The liability issue alone, I would be concerned.
Yeah, probably.
We were fine. Nobody died.
I feel that we got away with a lot on Warped Tour because for so long we flew under the radar. We were just out there doing our thing. And then it became a little more well-known. There was a little more but we flew under the radar. So it was interesting when I put this out, like, hey, reach out to me. I'd love to interview you. And sorry I couldn't interview everyone, but the response was like so great to this that it was really, really like I could only do. I did a lot of interviews. I did
a lot of people reach out about
it.
So who are we going to be?
Well, we're going to have Nick Martin, where a lot of you know that he's from Sleeping with Sirens, but he played in other bands that actually played on some of the smaller stage.
So he actually started from these small stages at Warped Tour. He's huge.
That's got into a very big band that had played on our main stages, and then we're going to check in with my friends when you're known as Smartpunk Ray. And this is 20 years later. He actually came out as he ran the stage. So he'll have some great stories. And he's still to this day, like he's running Ohana. He's doing all the big festivals in town. He's full-time, I think, with Live Nation now.
With a legitimate stage? Or
it was a semi-legitimate stage that he made more legitimate. And we're going to talk to Zach Neal who ran the East Coast Independent stage. But he's gone on to do, become a big businessman, and he used his lessons from this stage to go with him in business all the way along. He talks about that. Then there's Big John, who was in a band called SweaterGirl, who played on those stages and worked his way up. And then Shane Culpepper, who did the Transform stage, which was a lot of hip-hop, B-boys. We always try to keep kind of that. And they would create this backyard party vibe with a lot of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to talk to Junior, who everyone knows from Kleege Staging, and some of his interactions out on the road with some of these smaller stages. But I also want to, thank, yesterday Xavier was hanging around the house, and I go, hey, who's been answering all these texts that people have been sending in? And it kind of everyone faces went blank. And I said, hey, put the app on my phone, which you did, and now I can answer those texts to us and asking questions. And I already has last night. People were kind of getting pissed off. They're like, this is not a Kevin Lyman thing if he's not responding. I used to respond to everyone. Answer an email, answer a text. Obviously, he didn't pass that part of my class that I tell people that's what you do in business. But, it's if you want to text us.
You're going to get it, Xavier.
If you want to text us, 818-863-6445. That's 818-863-6445. Give us suggestions for episodes.
And a shout out to Liquid Death for our sponsor. Thank you very much. We're getting a lot of requests from sponsors. We have a new sponsor, too, which is Polka's Hottest Hot Sauce. And you guys are going to love what we have in store to promote Wendy and her special sauces. It's great. She even did a Kevin Lyman sauce.
And after, that last episode with Gary Tovar, a lot of new listeners started checking in.
That was one of our best. I had so much fun interviewing him and listening to Paul and Brian and Ann. And I had no idea about that story. Completely fascinated. Needs to be a movie.
And, we always like to feature nonprofits and everything. And we've beginning to releasing those full interviews exclusively on YouTube. So so subscribe to our channel and catch up with your favorite charities. I think it's a great time to dig in deep. We're all sitting here right now figuring out how we can help or do something for our communities. It started with those couple of stages, and we're going to jump into this, Tony. I think, I don't know what else we need to touch on today. It's just, we're still here. We're still
alive.
We're still standing. I always, people go, how's your day? And I go, I'm standing here. So that's a bonus. Hopefully we'll be standing here in the future doing more episodes.
How did this all start? The side stages. I'm curious. Was it Mr. Bartholomew who...
Well, it was interesting because I think what happened was some of those they knew that there was a limited space on those. So, of course, everything links back to Fletcher in some way.
Oh, shit.
As it always does. So when I caught up with Jay Bartholomew, he kind of let me know how it ended up working out for them. And they had a unique place for the second stage.
We had that very interesting position where we would end up basically playing twice a day, wherever... forgive me, I forget his name. He did the stage scheduling for you guys every day. It was Bryce's tour manager. Something with a D or Ramon. Damone, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would go in every day and be like, hey, like what stage do you have an open slot on? Kevin Says, the skate stage, Ernie Ball, whatever. And whatever slot they didn't have filled, they would throw us on. But what we had to do in the morning... So we would get up at 7 and set up our own stage and play to the people waiting in the lines as well.
It's like we had some stages inside, but they decided to take it out into the line. So they would set up by the front gates and and set up. And, it was that part of the outside is really interesting because a lot of people, bands followed the Warped Tour. They sold CDs in lines. They promoted. And people said, well, why do you let that happen? And I said, look, it's not discouraged, but not encouraged. I understood that why kids followed the tour. There was true music fans at Warped Tour. They were open to putting on a headset. It started with Walkmans and Discmans and then kind of worked their way up. And they wanted to listen to bands. So they were there to discover music. So when you were out there and you couldn't get a gig during the summer or you were playing clubs with 10 people in them or something, getting a chance to just go out and meet people, but then they took it farther where they set up the stage by the box office.
Oh, yeah, but the other thing, too, is I've been to Warped Tours, and that line, it's a one-day event, and that line gets really big, and it takes some time to get people through there. So I'll bet when they set up those stages at that line, they probably played in front of more people than they ever had in their entire life.
So, of course, when they set up out in front, usually the venue would come to me and go, wait, we've got a bait. Should we rip them down? Should we throw them out? Sometimes I have to get in the middle of that.
As most people would.
The venues, because most people would. But I thought it was pretty cool. And that actually goes back to way, way back when I was doing shows up at Hanson Dam with Golden Voice. We were doing this outdoor show. And one time this band set up out front by the gates. And it was 311 playing down by the waterfront. Big show at the 311.
Right.
And that band that set up, except I told them, you can't say I gave you permission. Like, you're okay, just do it. But don't say I gave you permission.
You're kind of screwing that up right now, Kevin. This is going to be...
It was sublime.
Get out!
Yeah, it was sublime. But as soon as someone comes up and goes, hey, like, you're not supposed to be set up, they go, Kevin Lyman told us. It was, like, totally cool. So here I am, like, with the production manager, Jim Caraccio, who's been on the show, and going, hey, man, sorry, like, I thought it was cool they'd be there. And the next thing I know, they're back drinking beer, their dog's back there.
How, at least you did it, you tried to do it on site, but you know how to pick them, Kevin. It was sublime for crying out loud. Where there's going to be a new segment here where you're going to start picking new stuff, too, and we're going to get to that.
But Jay was great because he brought up something like, anytime you do something, it starts to be emulated. And having more than one band out front could lead to certain situations.
I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you were very busy, but in 2009, I had to come tail between my legs into your office and apologize and explain to you what had happened because we did have an issue in 2009 some bands would come down and set up a stage as well and try and play out in front of the line, which is all, that's great. They're trying to do their thing, but, I felt like, that was my spot on the tour. I earned it. This was my first thing. I wasn't going to let some other band take my spot. I was, I wanted to play. I was very excited. And I went over and so I think this was at the Scranton date in 2009, Scranton, Pennsylvania. So anyways, a band had come down from Canada and set up a stage and started to play. And I was about to play. And so I went over nicely and asked him, was like, hey guys, I'm sorry. Like I showed him our credentials. It's like, this is actually our spot on the tour.
About Battle of the Bands.
But we are scheduled to play right now. I apologize for the drive, but do you mind stop playing? At least wait till we're done. And they said yes. And, everyone gets a little heated start to lose it a little bit about a month and a half into a tour. Because, it's always grueling. Anyways, I go back and I'm about to start playing and they just start playing again after I had asked them nicely to wait till we were done.
Here it comes.
And I got pretty upset. I just went back over and I was, not as nice this time. And the lead singer spit in my face. And then my brother tried to separate us. And then the guy basically just started to fight my brother, which is a terrible idea because he's a pretty big dude. Yeah. And he tried to punch my brother, and so he had to defend himself. And it was a thing.
We're out in the parking lot still. He's got his stage, and one of the things that happened a lot out there also was it got to the point where people were loading flatbed trucks or pickup trucks or school buses.
Right, they bring them in
and just drive around in the lot
and
play. So driving around the lot. So I think it always kept everyone on edge. The venues just like never like we're like, what is going on here? You didn't have this at other shows. Maybe the Grateful Dead in some ways, but it was like very much like, we used to call them warpedifarians. Like they were like kids who maybe got their like grandma's trust fund or had some saved up their money and they would follow it. So it was like you had deadheads and warpedifarians.
I want people to realize that it wasn't just one location where a band or a side stage, as we would call it, would come and just set up. They would literally pack up, get in their van, and they would follow the entire tour and do it again at the next location.
Yeah, so then, I caught up with a Big John. We always call him Big John. He's not as big as he used to be. Big John was his name. The man worked hard and could sweat more than anyone I'd ever seen. And he was actually in a band called SweaterGirl. And we call him Sweating Girl. They were known kind of on the road as Sweating Girl because he sweat so much. He was working so hard all the time. Yeah. And he's doing great now. He's got an activation company that works for different brands and sponsors. But I'll never forget when the crew went, whenever people go, there goes Sweating Girl. But he was in SweaterGirl. So Big John.
We did a couple dates on the brand new Ernie Ball stage. I guess Full Sail in the last few years of the tour. But we did, actually, I take that back. We did Ernie Ball in Chicago, and then we did the Tiki Tent in Detroit. The following day.
Right. The Tiki Tent. Can you describe the Tiki Tent?
Well, it was a tent, and there was a small platform and a small PA system, and I think there were a couple of bands that kind of came through, and you're like, hey, if you want to play, the Tiki Tent's open, and we jumped at it. So we ended up in the Tiki Tent, which was exactly as it sounds, a tent.
Yeah, these stages were loose at the beginning, like loosely. I think the Tiki Tent, for some reason, I thought it'd be great. And I think we had one band that actually played like Hawaiian music. I thought it'd be kind of fun. And then the next thing you know, I've got like punk bands playing in it, metal bands playing in the Tiki Tent. But, John was a great sport, and he just like wanted to be part of it. And I think it was like, for him, it was more than just a show.
Now, this is a year you had Green Day out there, and NoFX, and these huge artists that I just grew up listening to, and and in a very warped fashion, everybody was around and accessible, and in catering lines and talking to people, and from the moment we showed up and started to just mingle, it was immediately welcoming, and there were so many moments where we're kind of just like scratching our heads, like, wow, what are we doing here? Like, how did this even happen? And when you offered for us to come back that next day in Pontiac, I believe, Pontiac, Michigan, outside Detroit, and the Tiki Tent was going to be the stage this time. We jumped at it, and I think any other the bands that probably had a chance to play some of those small, tiny stages, to just have the opportunity to play on the Warped Tour, and to connect with that many people was incredible. But for us, it was getting up extra early, and hoping to get a spot to try to sling some merch. We figured out real fast that, Warped was a community, and, lending a hand in catering and unloading boxes might get you a meal. Getting out to the stage to help them set up might guarantee that, you get a better spot that day, whatever the case was. But, from pretty much when we got out there, we were hustling. We were hustling, trying to get people to listen to our music. When Volcom was a brand new stage, and I remember getting out there, and we made fast friends. I think Pepper was the other band that was setting up the stage and getting slots for it. So we offered to help, and it made friends with the stage managers and Volcom guys. And the next thing I know, like 26 days later, we were still playing out there. And on a lot of the days we got to play, and some days we didn't. There was a very faithful experience that changed the complete scope of the Warped Tour that happened that summer. And that was, we were in Atlanta, Georgia, and we weren't playing that day. And these kids were up at our tent, and we were telling them about the band. And the girl says, well, how am I supposed to buy your music if I can't even hear you guys? And we just sort of looked at each other. And I remember I had a book bag sitting on the merch table, and there was a CD Walkman sitting there. And she pointed at it. She's like, can I listen to it on that? And we all just looked at each other like, whoa. And she listened. We ended up selling out of a majority of our CDs by the end of that day. And you know better than anybody the trajectory that took for us, because it just, at the time, that hadn't happened yet. And there was no saturation. It was just, we're just out there. And for everybody, it was, I remember bands walking up to us, even some of the bigger bands were walking up to us and like, wait a minute. So people can listen to the music before they buy. And well, the rest they say is history. And that really changed things for us, because we sold so many CDs out there, CDs, remember those things? That by the time we'd come back from tour, there was still a good buzz about the fact that, we'd been out on the Warped Tour, which was at the time, 2000, 2001, there wasn't a ton of baby bands, if any.
I don't think that could ever happen today. I'm surprised it happened then. You had side stages that you didn't set up. You had bands come out who got exposed, sold their own merchandise, which you, from a business perspective, are thinking, I have young kids who have a finite amount of money to spend when they get into the venue. And I'm sure you wanted to generate that revenue for the tour so you could keep going. But you let them go. And they were even asked later to play on your stages.
That's
cool.
And when he says Volcom, Volcom was a clothing brand in Southern California. Great guy named Ryan Emigart was running the label down there with Mark Gardner. Mm-hmm. And they just found, it was that crossover again between action sports and music that was so like dynamic at that point, that they're like, okay, we're going to take some of our marketing money. We're not going to put it into a surf contest or something. And, we're going to go out there on the road, similar to what Vans did, and hit the bricks and be part of this whole thing. And it was great, but those bands, so, they get on a stage, but unlike those tour buses or some of those vehicles where you have someone to call or maintenance, these kids were out there in their vans, their vehicles following around.
They were on their own.
Which kind of, it got tough at times for them.
When I was still playing in SweaterGirl, it was around that time when, we go through 2 transmissions. You literally watch every single cent that you have is gone. You're out at the tour and you're there and you're part of it, but like, you're thinking to yourself, hey, is this worth it? Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this happen? I remember we were supposed to be heading to Cleveland, and we broke down again for the second time in 3 weeks. And it was a scenario where most of the band was like, we should just call it, man. Like, let's just go back to Chicago and like kind of, leave it at that. And we had made the decision by the time we got back in that U-Haul that like, hey, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Or so we thought it was at the time. We got to make it happen. And we did. And it got us kind of our spirits back up. But, that wasn't just, playing on the tour. I remember in 2007, it was a long, the tour would get long sometimes when you were, working certain jobs. And although the gig in 2007 was great, working for Feuds, we were pulling long days, and we were coming on like a 10-day run, and you're just tired and you're chafed and you're sunburned and you're just over everything. And the Armageddon came to Cleveland. And if you remember it, lightning struck that bridge behind us like 6 times, and it wiped out a bunch of Merch World. All kinds of bands had to go home. We had that big fuse trussing structure thing that was indestructible. And I remember the feet of it jumping up in the air, and the roof got ripped back. Pop, 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 pop. All the zip ties just went. And this golf ball size hail comes down. People are diving under tables. We just basically are trying to get the kids and get them onto the semi that was behind the stage, because everyone's getting pelted with hail. And I remember getting on that truck, and I had myself about talked out. I'm like, you know what? F this. I'm going home. And by the time, some barbecue and a few drinks and a good night's rest, I was ready to hit it full speed ahead the next day. And I did.
The power of the Kevin Lyman barbecue.
Barbecue just makes it all well.
Makes it all better.
And that's the thing. John's gone on to have a successful experiential marketing company, activating for people that he used to maybe work for, the types of companies and everything. But people wonder, could you be successful out there as a band? And selling CDs. We were still in the era of CDs. It was a big part of it. We ended up making it where we could actually sound scan some of those kids that followed the tour in the second stages. And it was funny because the kids back then, it got more technology caught up with SoundScan, but I used to have to sign every form. So you've got 80 to 100 bands, 7 days a week that have to get their form signed. Then we had to fax them all. And then SoundScan would want to check up because they'd call us and go, SweaterGirl.
Who's that?
Who's that? Unsigned. Sold how many records?
We were all trying to figure out ways that we could obviously sell more music. And one of the guys in the band said, well, what if we, hit doors, doors in the morning, doors at night, people coming and going, it's worth it. So what we would do is we got a megaphone. We got some poster board. We made signs that kind of told our story, and we would literally just stand out there and talk to people, talk to kids coming by, and it was always the same conversation. Well, I don't know. I'm like, well, you're wearing an AFI shirt. Do you like AFI? Well, of course I do. The best band ever. Well, if you never heard AFI for the first time, you probably wouldn't like them, would you? Okay, fine. I'll listen. And 3 out of 5 times they bought discs. I think the first summer that we did it was that summer of 2001. And we did I don't know, probably around 9,000 CDs, give or take. But it wasn't until in 2002 when you allowed us in 10 Times a Day, the first parking lot band from 2001, when you allowed us to come and tag along the tour, we had this, what looks like a very crazy idea now, to team up, put a compilation CD together of our music, their music, plus all of our friends. And we had bands, Chris #2 from Anti-Flag gave us songs. Everybody gave us music. And we sold the comps for $5. And somehow Nick from 10 Times a Day convinced Stuart Taggart to lend us a tour bus that we were going to pay with $5 CD comps. And we did. About by the end of that summer, I think we combined sold something like 20,000 discs between us and the other band. And that was actually a big turning point in that kind of stuff for Warped Tour, because at the time, everybody else had picked up on this. So everyone's out of the doors and you'd walk past, 7 people all selling different music. So we got together, we bundled the CDs. Everybody took a couple less bucks and we all sold together. And that was a game changer.
That's brilliant. So they had basically a compilation album, and it funded their vans and tours to keep going.
Yeah,
you didn't get one stinking penny.
No, it really wasn't. It was interesting because I also had to kind of I guess would be the best word, the promoters into thinking that these kids didn't have any money at Warped Tour. So we were doing merch buyouts, so they wouldn't sit there and count all the merchandise and do all this stuff.
Right.
Because I wanted to keep as much money in the kids' pockets as possible to buy stuff.
That is really great, Kevin. You really didn't
now
want to get rich, did you?
And these kids, people don't really look at it, that Warped Tour became, for good or bad, the greatest lifestyle traveling mall, discount mall. Because you could buy your music, you could buy your back-to-school clothes, you could buy all this stuff. And I used to hold up the package. It was really weird. And it was you'd be like, you could buy this for $45 at Warped Tour. It'd be all this stuff. Or you can buy this T-shirt at Britney Spears or something, and it'd be so the kids would go back to school and all of a sudden they've got all this stuff they picked up at this one tour, and you got the one kid with the one shirt, One Direction or something. So it was really cool. But I mean, we try to analyze how much money was flowing around. But I think kids would come with $100 and spend it on all their favorite bands and doing different things. And, $5 for this CD, $1 for this thing, stickers, things. But this, but John went on to do great things. It's great. But he took all those little things you picked up on marketing. He's now doing for other brands. He's working in that world. He transferred from his music career to being able to do that, which is fantastic. And this next person we're going to talk to has done the same thing. I think he runs a large investment fund out of New York now, but he started in the parking lots of Warped Tour. His name is Zach Neal. I'd lost touch with Zach, but Zach came up with the idea of the East Coast Independent Stage.
Well, the origins are, there used to be a stage, which I'm sure you'll remember. They called it the Space Station Stage. And it was like a van that looked like it came out of Star Wars. And this guy, Avi, used to just set up plywood in front of it and bands would play. And it was a great place for bands that couldn't get on the tour in any kind of traditional fashion. They weren't notable yet, or they just didn't have an inroad. And so he saw my band play in the town where Warped Tour was happening at like an after venue, and invited us to come play a couple dates. And so we did. And then the next year he said we could play again, but then he called me and said he wasn't going to do the tour. And we had been outfitting him with a PA system for like a lot of the East Coast dates. We were like providing him with like some PA stuff and equipment. And he said, hey, you have all the equipment. You should just do the stage since I can't do it anymore, but you have to ask Kevin first, which I did. Harassed you through email about 1,000 times a day for, months. It was the next year till we got it done. But eventually, yeah, you said, yeah, let's do it. And so we did it. And it was quite a feat to get that thing going. The first year, I think it was just a tent and plywood and a trailer and a van and pretty crazy stuff. But that's how it started. And I think that was 2003, if I'm correct.
Coming out of the East Coast, Zach had a great ear for music too, and it was very interesting. When he was approaching me, and he's another one. But you got to back up a little bit. A space station stage. Were you thinking about that when that came up, Tony?
I was also wondering, was it just one venue location, or was it all up and down
the
coast?
No, well, the East Coast Independent ended up becoming a nationwide stage.
Oh, wow.
The space station stage was done by a band called the Phenomenons. Uh-huh. And they were like spacemen. And they had this thing that was direct, take that float, and, I always say, like, Animal House. Remember the float when it breaks out of the thing? And it was kind of that driving down the highway. It was like they drove this thing around and it looked like a flying space station.
So this was a mobile stage?
No, they drove their car. It was built out of a car, and they would live in it, and they would drive, and then they would put their plywood out front, and everyone would gravitate to this because it would look like
out of this world.
It looked like, one of those old things. So it was, great. But, the nice thing about Zach was right away, I knew he had a really good ear for music.
We would just kind of go around anywhere that our band was touring, and we would find bands in different areas and bands that we liked. I mean, I think the first 3 years that we booked it was really just like we just booked the bands we liked, which was probably not the smartest move. We got a little smarter as we went on, but the first 3 years, it was just like, yeah, I love this band. Let's just book them. So it was really just finding bands that we liked, bands that we were friends with, a lot of bands from the Northeast that, we would see in clubs, and just be like, hey, do you guys want to play Warped Tour? And they're, oh, of course, and I think they would think it was going to be something a lot more grand than it was. I think most of them hated playing our stage. It was pretty miserable at first, for sure.
You start these stages, you're learning and everything, and I ask, going back, I'd ask these people during these interviews, like, going back, would you, would you have done it all over again?
Stay home instead. Go back to school. Don't do it. I mean, it was a lot of fun, but it was crazy because essentially what we got from you, and like, Kevin, you're a great dude, but not a man of many words. And so the communication that we got from your office was really simple. Don't piss anybody off. Don't be an annoyance, and don't get in the way. And then you can set up. And so that was kind of like our running orders were like, Kevin said we could be here and not to get in anyone's way. So essentially we were completely on our own. It was get there. I mean, I remember the first day we had a trailer in a field, and we were there at like 6:30 in the morning before the tour was. And so the first thing that happened was, Carrie, the guy that is the gentleman that placed all the stages on Warped Tour, didn't know who we were. So he was super annoyed that we were there to begin with. Where like at first out of the gate, he's mad because he's like, who are you? Why are you here? Why are you setting up this calamity plywood stage in the front of where I'm putting my main stage? So the logistics are, first figure out how to afford it, which is the hardest part because it's really expensive. Even at the most like independent nonsense level, it costs a lot of money to tour across the country with 15 people and stage equipment. If you can figure out how to pay for it, figure out how to make it roadworthy. Is it waterproof? Will it hold up to day after day after day in the hot sun? How do you power it? You need generators, you need fuel, you need transportation to get out in and out of a venue where you're parked in by buses. I mean, it's a crazy amount of logistics for a bunch of dudes that are like 22 to 24 years old trying to figure out every day while, being in probably the hardest physical conditions you could imagine. The hottest part of the summer in places like Texas and Florida where it's like ungodly hot.
It's a school of hard knocks for these kids, though, but it's good. They learned a lot, I bet.
It really was.
And more fun than joining the Marines. That's for goddamn sure.
Absolutely. When I was talking to these guys, I asked them, was it really easy once you got rolling?
We had a stage trailer come loose while towing it and just fly off the road, which was awesome. We had probably the biggest one was, I think it was probably like 2006 or 7. You'd know better than me, but it was one of the first years we had our shit together. It was the first year that we were like, we actually knew what we were kind of knew what we were doing. And we showed up and we had a great stage that year. We had actually invested some money and got like a stage that was better and a real tent top and got a real PA system, got some sponsorships finally.
Right.
And it was like the 3rd or 4th date of the tour. And there was this crazy storm in Cleveland. And it just came when our stage was right next to the waterfront where we were placed that day. And this storm came off the waterfront out of nowhere with no warning and literally just destroyed everything we had. It literally ripped our tent off and threw it in the lake.
Murphy's Law.
Doused our PA system. And like everything we had was completely ruined. Like there was no hope of repairing any of it. All the metal was twisted. The tents were gone. And so that was like, I think, and we were like, we don't have insurance because we're not like a real company. And we don't have any money because we're kids. And we're like, there's no possible way that we can go to Kevin or production's office and like plead poverty, like help us. Our stage was destroyed by weather. But inevitably you did. I mean, we didn't really have to ask. I think you just kind of were like, hey, I have an extra tent. We have a skate stage. Your bands can play there for the next couple of days until you figure out how to get it all put back together. But that was one really crazy thing. I mean, if I think about the 10 years that I did the production, the amount of crazy things that we experienced or saw, I mean, shootouts, in Washington, D.C., gunfights, crazy brawls, riots, weather, broken down buses, crashes, accidents. I mean, just an insane amount of things that you see when you're traveling the country like that.
I have to step back and understand how you saw this as a value add because they got wiped out. You had no obligation to help them whatsoever. And you're looking at these kids going, you must have felt bad for them. And you gave them tents. You helped them out to get back and running. What was the value add? Was it just because you were being super nice? Or did you see that you were creating a scene?
It was just that they got themselves there. Everyone, they didn't realize like how over the head they were actually in most of these things. But I let them come and they got there. So once they were in the world, they became part
of family.
And that's, what we don't realize in society so much right now. We're seeing it fray in many different ways. We're all part of a community and we're all part of it. So they were part of my community. Yeah. And, their stage was one. There was 3 or 4 other ones, plus all my stuff that got destroyed that day.
Right.
It wasn't like our stuff didn't get unscathed. But I felt like I wanted to get him down the road. I just didn't want to send him home and leave him behind. I can't say that it happened all the time.
No.
But the majority of the time we were able to patch it together until we can get everyone up. But the coolest thing about it is when I hear, if you had sent those guys home, who knows? Zach's a very smart guy, but he's gone on to do some pretty cool stuff, and he attributes a lot that he learned out there.
How long of a period did he manage the East Coast stage?
I think they came out, 3, 4, 5 years, something like that.
And so after all of that and those experiences, what is he doing now?
He's like a big investment person.
I'm an 8th grade dropout from like a tiny town, super conservative town. I have no education, and I own a $30 million company now.
What?
And I legitimately have always said this, that the lessons that I learned touring in punk bands and particularly Warped Tour were a huge part of that. You learn to be sales and marketing at a level that like, I don't think anybody that, is coming from formal education can understand. Like when you have to sell $1,500 a day to live, you learn how to sell $1,500 a day to live. When you need to get someplace, when you need things fundamentally. So I think that, also, first of all, if you can survive Warped Tour, you're a hero. If you can thrive in it, you're a legend. And so I know so many people that came off of that tour, and we talk now as, way later in our lives, and the lessons we learned out there were amazing. I mean, it was an ecosystem that was built to build champion entrepreneurs. It was like, it should have just been called like Warped University. It was an entrepreneur boot camp. You learn how to sell, you learn how to market, you learn how to strategize, you learn logistics, you learn skills you never thought you would have. I mean, a lot of the stuff I learned on Warped Tour, I'm still using today. We're setting up AV and audio equipment and computer logistics and things that like, you had to figure out how to set up mobile communications every day with no internet, using like, Verizon cards and fields. I mean, it was crazy, but yeah, I loved it. I don't think I think a couple years I came off the tour feeling defeated just because like I got my ass kicked, but I always was really happy to be there. And as to your point, kept coming back because, once you figured out like the unlock code, it was an amazing place to be.
And that's kind of, for me personally, Tony, that's like what I'm doing with my students at school now. Like, I not doing it on the road, but, I got 120 people. And I was on campus the other day and kind of getting them fired up, figuring out who might want to be working shows, what their skill sets are. And it's really cool because the music community is kind of reaching out to me now saying, hey, we've got a position open here. Do you have someone from your school that fits this? Sure. Everyone you've sent me so far has been good. That's where I'm focused now. But it was really cool because we've talked about bands going out on Warped Tour, about these stages.
And what's unique about all these stages, some of them were regional, some of them went all around. Each of them had their own unique name, right? The East Coast one. I know that there was an all-girl one we're going to talk about too. But do you remember all the names from these?
I actually didn't. Some people called me and were like, I played on the Django chain. I'm like, what? Okay, cool. All right.
Tiki stage? What?
The Tiki stage was one that I'm like, forgot about. But you don't forget about Smartpunk. Smartpunk was a company. It was right when the internet was coming forth into promotions and music. And Smartpunk was promoting these bands. And this stage ended up having some big bands on it. And
really?
You'll learn about that during this segment. Everyone that worked on that stage, Ray Picard being the first stage manager, was referred to uniquely by a certain name that has stuck with him 17 years later to this day.
Smartpunk Ray just kind of came along with the branding that the stage was, I think after I left, there were some other stage managers. I think there was Ricky, who became Smartpunk Ricky, right? It was kind of, the name kind of came with the stage. No, I of course I run into people still and still talk to people this day that were around back then, which was now 17 years ago, was my first year on Warped, working the tour, in 2004. And, it's just, And of course, every time I see Sully, it's Smartpunk Ray, where the Kung Fu mosh pits were invented.
Ray Picard was the epitome of why sometimes these little stages worked. And Ray Picard is someone who I, worked for me in many places. He ended up becoming my production manager for things like Mayhem. I think he did Taste of Chaos. I know he did a lot of the John Reese tours. He's doing production for Live Nation now. He's a very in-demand production manager, but you have to start somewhere. So Ray Picard started out on Warped Tour.
I was not a stage manager when I went out on that tour to begin with. I was actually booking bands. I was booking tours. I had an independent booking agency, and I was working with a lot of Fearless record bands at the time, Dynamite Boy and 30 Foot Fall and Lonely Kings. And around that time, I actually stopped booking bands because some of the bands I was booking, one of them being a Wilhelm Scream, had just signed a Nitro Records, and Corey Christopher was interested in working with them. And it was kind of a chance for them to kind of go on to that next step and a bigger booking agent. And I started touring with them. And then Fearless, Bob and Graham, who had started Smartpunk, were going to be sending out this stage. And they obviously knew that I was no longer booking tours for their bands anymore. And I'd kind of gone on to, touring, and we're like, well, Ray, we have the stage we're putting out on the Warped Tour. Do you want to go manage the stage for us? And I think that at the time, like Gatsby American Dream was a band that was originally going to be, I think, the original band that was booked to build the stage, and their tour manager or whoever, someone with that band, was going to be this, look after it. Well, that fell through or something happened. And so then I came along, and And I remember I didn't know anybody, that really worked with Smartpunk other than Bob and Graham. And I remember showing up to Houston, Texas that first year in 2004. And it was pouring rain out. I didn't know anybody yet. Didn't know really my crew other than some phone calls we had prior to starting the tour. And I remember showing up and we had a lot of shit. We had actual blow through barricade. We had, a lot of stuff that I think might have been missed or crossed the line somewhere. And there just really, wasn't the truck space for it because we were figuring out, I think the plan was we were going to go do Dallas and San Antonio and then come back and make up Houston on the day off that we were going to have before going to New Mexico. So you're like, all right, we're going to leave all your stuff here. We have some, dry storage. We'll bring your PA. We'll make room on a truck for it somewhere, and we'll use some of the venue stages that already exist at these next 2 Texas stops. So I remember, all right, cool, let's do it. Went through those did those 2 first Texas stops, and I think you saw kind of what kind of crowds these bands were bringing, because I don't think you were really too familiar with some of these bands, because Smartpunk at the time was like basically kind of a distribution. It wasn't really a record label. It's just more of like you're going to self-produce or self-release your CD, and here's an outlet where you can distribute it from, right? So a lot of these bands were kind of new and upcoming bands, and we actually had a pretty good draw. And I think you noticed that, and you're like, well, you know what? We're actually going to need that barricade. We're not sending that back to California, And when we went back to Texas or Houston to make up the date, we found room in the trucks for everything. And I just remember being in everything was like scattered in 3 or 4 different trucks. And that's, kind of how it all started.
Do you remember side stages getting really, really big, like huge draws? Do you remember thinking to yourself, oh shit, they're doing really well?
I would say, if I had to go through it, I'd say Smartpunk was that breakthrough, because it was a period of time where we were still, there was a lot of punk still out there. There was that but there was this whole kind of other movement coming.
Yeah, emo was coming up.
Screamo, some of this kind of stuff.
Progressive punk, post-punk.
So I got the chance to see quite a few bands on that stage for the first time. And, it was really interesting. So I asked Ray to give me let's run down some of the bands that were on that Smartpunk stage.
Scary Kids Scaring Kids, 18 Visions. I don't remember if Under Oath was on that very first year in 2004. But we had Chiodos and we had Sayasin when Phil from Story of the Year was singing for them. It was a popular stage, and me growing up more with the the punk rock world and not familiar with any of these bands, that blew me away too. Kind of surprised, and I was actually, I remember I'm like, wow, there's more people in front of my stage for this band that I never heard of than there is watching Strung Out on main stage right now.
But there was one band that blew up on the Smartpunk stage that ended up playing my main stages multiple times, and Ray kind of described his interaction with this person.
I remember was it Ronnie Radke? Is his name right? Ronnie, his first band was Escape the Fate, right? And they were on Smartpunk stage. They're very, very fresh new band. And I remember the very first day, and he just, had a pretty big ego. I remember the first day coming up to me, I introduced myself and, hey, how you doing, Ray? I'm Ronnie. Next year, we're going to be on the main stage. I said, cool. All right. Well, this year you're playing Smartpunk stage. Let's do it. And then watch that band just blow up.
Yeah, this is that time where sometimes those punk bands, this stage, and it's all of a sudden, for me, it made me keep thinking on the fly, because all of a sudden, some of those side stages, you wouldn't have security on them. It'd be like, and then all of a sudden, like, whoa, we need a barricade. We need security on that. And I also need to keep that stage out here. So that's why I created the truck space for them and made sure we could bring them, because that's when I was like, oh, wow, they are definitely bringing a huge value to the tour.
Right.
We're giving them a platform for their company, Smartpunk being a brand that's selling music, but they were bringing tickets.
And subsequently, did you finally hire some of the bands that were on these stages on your main stage?
Pretty much everyone he just mentioned went up and played another stage,
Wow, that's great.
at some point of the tour.
And that's not just beyond the bands, too, because it takes a lot to run the stage. You have a stage manager, producer, backstage. I'll bet that they work just as hard as your crew, too, and you might have hired them.
I think in many times they worked harder because maybe we hadn't allotted a real segment of stagehands. We would give them, we had X amount of time and X amount of people to get that show up.
Right.
So, of course, the priority is going to be the stuff that we had to get up. And then we would send them maybe an hour before doors, they would get some help. But they were doing a lot of the majority of their work, and they would utilize bands. There was always that, he mentioned that bands had actually helped set up the stages.
I had never been a stagehand. I'd never really been really exposed to like concert production or stagehand work, right? So that was kind of the start of it for me, being more on the booking side of things, and then going into like kind of the production world, and just took it from there.
And after about a week, did you decide almost want to go back to booking? It was like a
no.
Were you kind of hooked on the road at that point?
I loved it, and the Underminer guys and Nick and all those dudes were just they made it happen. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to do it every day. I mean, I knew what I was going in for. I knew. I mean, it defined every DIY meeting, and because it was, and you had to get it done, and there was no. There was bands that were booked to play that stage that day, and we had no choice. So when it came to, we didn't have stagehands, we had the bands building it. And then, along the way, we'd have some bands that were just kind of following the tour and helping out, and hopefully there was room for them that day if a band didn't show up because they got, I don't know. But yeah, it was definitely a new experience that I really, really enjoyed.
When you go out on your first tour, he's coming from the agency world. I asked him, how did people respond to someone who'd never really done this?
I think it went over really well because I never got the feeling that I wasn't a part of the tour. Even though it wasn't an official Warped Tour stage, it wasn't, and it was a sponsor stage. It was as official as it could get as far as, the bands that were playing and what it really was, But I feel like I got it, I was accepted from the start. I think maybe because it was my work ethic and it was my, and just being organized and kind of, showing up to production in the morning. I've got a schedule, and it was just always thinking ahead, and just being patient. I remember, I would be up at the crack of dawn walking with Carrie Nicholson and you and while there was other stage managers just kind of still sleeping on the bus and waiting for their stage to be dropped and kind of running to the stage, but I was there first thing in the morning before anything was placed at the crack of dawn, just kind of just mouth shut, just waiting for, all right, the placement, and then, all right, where are my trucks going to be? Oh shit. Trucks are about a half a mile away. All right, I'll figure it out. I'll get that shit from over there to over here. And, maybe I'll get a forklift. If not, we're going to push that thing a half a mile, we'll do whatever it takes to get it done. And I think that went a long way with Carrie Nicholson. So when he could put me in a better position, a better placement for the stage, or if the main stage was, if there was a side stage, the Volcom stage or Marie stage that was in the amphitheater, then I would have the mobile stage that day, and be less building for the crew, and we'd be just, super stoked,
There's some old people who've been touring and out there for a long time and working. And I had to check in with Ken Walker Jr. from Kleege Staging, who did all the stages on Warped Tour from the beginning. He supplied the hydraulic stages. We worked close together. We still keep in great contact. But I asked him, with Ray Picard, who now Ray uses him for everything. Mm-hmm. It just, you pass it on and your relationships. But I asked, Junior, what makes Ray stand out as a production manager?
He's still in my phone as Smartpunk Ray, and that's 15 years, 20 years now. Ray's a good dude, man. He was up before anybody else, drinking Red Bulls and smoking cigarettes, waiting for us to show up. He was good though. I know he put bands in their place and took care of business. He learned from everybody. So now, he's running stuff. So he had to learn somewhere, and I think that was a good place. As Warped Tour was always a good place for everybody to learn. He learned from just doing it. He managed a couple bands later, and now he's doing these great big festivals. But he learned from you guys, from you and Carrie, and just started at the bottom.
I don't think Ray knew right away how, like, Carrie had his eye on him. I had my eye on him.
You guys all hired him later, didn't you?
Yeah. So, I still had other tours going and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I had sent him out on our Taste of Chaos tour.
Oh, okay.
And this led to, we were getting ready to start the Mayhem Festival. Similar to I always look at people and go, there's a pool of fantastic production managers and things. But especially right now, that pool's pretty small. A lot of people aren't doing this.
A lot of people had to get other careers.
Yeah, a lot of people went into private sector, things like they're doing. But I always try to sometimes look for that diamond in the rough. And I think, when this next one, when Ray really took that next leap, he talks about how that went down.
Lisa calls you on the radio. She's like, hey, you come into the office and what's up? Kevin wants you to call. I'm like, oh shit, what happened? It's Sunday, it's family day. Why does Kevin want to, talk to me right now? And that's when you offered me the production manager gig for Mayhem Fest. Mayhem Fest at that time, just kind of following the steps of Ozfest being the biggest summer metal fest, right? And so I tried to say no. I didn't think I was ready for that big step. And I was like, well, maybe Kevin, I should just maybe jump to the main stage manager position or something, and before I'm the production manager. And you wouldn't let me turn it down. You're like, no, Ray, you're not going to turn this down. It's your gig. You're going to take it. Greg Dean's going to go out and do Green Day now. And this is your gig. And that turned into 8 years.
You speak about Greg Dean. And Greg Dean was the same way. When we got Greg Dean to be a production manager for one of our tours, He had never done that. And then he was doing Mayhem. And then all of a sudden he got the Green Day tour.
Right.
So he went off to do that. Now Greg Dean's doing all the Riot Game stuff in China. Like he works for a corporate client. So he's out of that pool of touring right now. Mm-hmm. And Ray is in such demand right now. They're just stacking up his life over the next couple of years.
What is Ray doing now?
He's the production manager actually full-time for Live Nation now, handling Ohana Festival. I think he's going to go into their festival department. He's fantastic.
You changed his whole life.
He's so buttoned up as a human being and as a production manager now. We all hit rough patches. He's gotten through anything he had, and he's doing great. And I always love him.
At the time you offered him the position, he was looking at you saying, "You know what? I'm not ready for this." And what was it in him that made you go, "You're just doing this"?
My gut just told me he would be able to pull it off. And
you were right.
And you know what? Also, Tony, before we move on. He stepped up. He steps up all the time and asks me if I have any young students that want to work for him, and people who need a chance. And he's been great with giving some people opportunities.
He learned that experience from you, I suppose.
We just talked about falling in reverse, and everyone starts somewhere. So Escape the Fate started on the Smartpunk stage, went up to the main stages, but a lot of people don't realize that there was an artist. Nick Martin, who was in a band, Underminded, and where he started, and how his career started on Warped Tour.
Was it side stage?
Oh, it was, yeah.
My first Warped Tour I attended was in 1998 in San Diego at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and it was one of those shows that changed my life. I saw Rancid that year. God, I can't remember who else was on that.
Blink-182 was, right?
Blink was on it, yeah. I can't remember if I think Eminem did it maybe that year. Maybe that was 97, 98.
No, that was Eminem was on that year. So
yeah,
and we were playing at the county fair.
Yeah. It was insane. Changed my life. I remember seeing Rancid and being like, one day, but that's what I want to do. I want to be on stage with Rancid, just like what Rancid's doing. I got to do that. So my first band, we were based out of San Diego. And just like a punk rock hardcore band, we started in high school, a couple of buddies, actually we started our band in the Fuentes household with Mike and Vic from Pierce the Veil. So we're cousins. So we started our bands in high school together. Mike was our original drummer, and we grew up in the scene together. And one of all of our goals for Undermined and for what became Pierce the Veil was got to get on Warped Tour. So the first year that I played Warped Tour was in 2003 in San Diego. We played on the local stage, and it was under a tent. And we had to stop several times throughout our set because our crowd was going so crazy that they were knocking into the poles that were holding this tent up, and it became a huge it could have been a disaster, but everything was okay. But it was definitely a situation I look back on now. I was like, that was really, really rowdy.
Imagine the whole tent just shaking all over the place.
Those little tent stages, something, and that's where I found these bands. Like The Used played in a little tent stage.
That's crazy.
And even I think Warped Tour, this is where tents and Warped Tour, you don't just start out. And even when we broke into Europe with Warped Tour, we went and played the Reading Festival.
Right.
And we had an agreement with the promoters, but they put us in far out, smallest tent, no water, cold showers, I remember, catering, same type of thing. We had to go out there and just prove ourselves. And that first year in Europe, the tent got torn down. Like literally, the tent was getting torn down by the fans.
They were super rowdy.
They were just stoked to be there. And then the promoter took notice of us. And very similar how we had to fight it out when we went to Europe to prove that these bands were relevant and worth something. And each year we would get moved to a bigger tent, and it would get torn down, and it would be wild, just great. These bands stood out. When I would get a radio call like, well, the tent's getting torn down, trust me, I wanted to run over and see who was playing, because that was, because if you could stir emotion.
I would think getting a tent torn down is a bad thing, but you perceived it as they're really rocking it.
I perceived it as like, this is something I need to pay attention to.
Interesting.
So, it was a great thing the tent torn down, which kind of led them to
there's got to be some kind of metaphor for that. The tent going down. What kind of a band is it? It's a band that would make the tent go down.
Yeah, just something, you want to take that across the country and transfer that energy maybe from a local level to a national level. But it's not all of a sudden the tent got torn down and you went to a big stage.
Do you remember the tent that Nick started on down in San Diego as Del Mar? No.
Smartpunk Ray, yeah, he was tough that summer, man. He was really tough. But I look back on it now, and he was just tough because he had to be tough, We got in a lot of arguments, and we laugh about it now. Him and I have talked about all this stuff now. We completely just die laughing thinking about it. But we just get in arguments all the time of just, obviously, it just gets really intense. And when you're halfway through the tour, and the heat is getting to you, and you're dehydrated, and just anything sets you off, but I remember us just finally putting our foot down with Ray, we can't open today. We deserve better. We're going on strike. We're not going to open. And I remember, I think some other bands like Under Oath was on our stage that year, and From First to Last, and they were all kind of like, yeah, Ray, don't let them open today, and just Ray throwing a fit. Oh God, you guys are just chapping my ass, and just so, so mad. But he was just doing his job. Our manager at the time was doing shows for Golden Voice and stuff. And he had got word that smartpunk.com was going to start their own stage. So he was pushing for us to do it, but we weren't much of a name yet. We didn't even have a record out on Kung Fu yet. And I think Bob Becker that was kind of overseeing all that stuff at the time. He told our manager at the time that if Undermined wants to play, they have to set up a stage every day. And I'm sorry, we don't have money to pay them. And they have to open up the stage every single day. And, there's obviously we didn't have a budget for a bus. We had to do an abandoned trailer. And for most bands, I think that they would be weary of doing it and be hesitant. And we were just we're all in, let's go, we're down, whatever it takes. So we learned how to build a stage from scratch, actual pallets, pallet stages. So this wasn't the crank stages that came to be the way to do staging. We were building a stage every single day from scratch, the legs for it, the pallets we had to lift, these were insanely heavy pallets. And we had to find the semi truck that it was on every morning. And we had a tough time that whole summer with getting union workers to help us because they were tied up with other stages. They didn't care about wanting to help us and carry these pallets. So we just had to find ways every day to these like treacherous journeys through mud and everything else just to like find our spot. And yeah, that was my summer.
People kept bringing up bands who kind of blew up and moved to different stages.
Right.
And he was in one, but changed bands to be up on that main stage, his other band. But it was, that was the summer of Under Oath.
That was the year that Under Oath just broke. Like that was when They're Only Chasing Safety came out. I think it came out like 2 weeks into Warped Tour, and literally it was like overnight, like on a Thursday, they still had big crowds, but then by like Friday or Saturday, suddenly the stage was just swamped. I remember you coming to the stage multiple times as Under Oath was blowing up on that stage of like, is this turning into like a safety concern? Because there was just so many kids going crazy. And I remember the stage getting kind of screwed up from kids like banging into it. And I think they destroyed a stage one day, and it wasn't ours. It was like an amphitheater, like a little wooden stage that was set up like near the beer garden, and it got completely demolished, I think. And it was crazy to watch a band like Under Oath just completely explode overnight. And then same with From First to Last, like watching Sonny just climbing the trussing and just like launching himself into the crowd every day, and watching Ray just completely lose his shit on Sonny and rest of From First to Last. It was crazy to watch those bands just explode that summer.
From First to Last became Skrillex.
Yeah.
Sonny, But that was the thing. Ray was like, he's out there. These kids, had energy. They were part of a scene that was blowing just underground and now coming into
to the light.
Sunlight, literally. And this was a time when these scenes were really defining themselves. And these bands, were fighting. There was a lot of these bands. There was a lot of bands playing this type of music. But they were like, who was going to rise to the top? So they were, there was a lot, it was coming back on me sometimes. Like, oh, man, you need to move this band to another stage. And I go, I'm not going to kick off a band from that stage. And we had to roll it through. Sometimes, stages came from different places. And sometimes they were like lifestyle-oriented stages because everyone always felt, and we're going to be having an episode coming up about Shira, about bringing more females out on the tour and her mission. But there was also culture. And I caught up with a guy named Shane Culpepper who the culture of hip-hop on Warped Tour. Sometimes we'd had artists on the stages, but it was really, there's a lot more to the culture. There's b-boy dancing, there's graffiti artwork, there's poetry. So they created their own stage called the Transform Stage, which was out on the tour for a few years. And it was all about this lifestyle. So sometimes those side stages come from lifestyle as much as musical. And Shane talks about it.
I came on to Warped Tour as an artist on a DIY stage. So in 2014, I was offered a spot by Tyler Fritz, who was doing the Yo BIBT stage, who he took over from Coda the Cuts. And I was out there as an artist, and I got a chance to see how Warped Tour works. And my mind was blown by this little town that could travel from cities to city and just set up and break down. And I seen so much love there. I seen so much family. I seen so much camaraderie that after 2014, being an artist out there and working my butt off and helping set up that stage every day and doing everything that it takes, I found other things out there that I liked. And one of the things I seen that could be great was something I called Warped Big Wheelers, which was I would just push around people in wheelchairs that needed to get from A to B in some of the terrains and things that were crazy. And I found a lot of love in helping them get there, or helping use my opportunity in my past for them to meet some cool people and have a great time out there. And just found myself doing different things besides my stage. It's a long day out there, and you perform your slot, and then there's a lot to do. So in 2015, I went out without talking to anybody, and I went out the first day, and I just seen how everything was running, and I talked to Lisa. Shout out Lisa Brownlee for always being there for me. And I talked, and she sent me to you, and I said, Kevin, I really want to bring the kids something special. What they had at this DIY stage is done. What can be is still here, and I want to work hard, but I'm willing to do bottom level. I'm willing to prove myself every day. So that year I told you I'm gonna bring out break dancers, and I'm gonna bring these people out to dance. And we don't need a space. We don't need anything. We'll take all the unused space and we'll make it fun for the kids. And I don't exactly know how well this little treat works for us, but I do have some videos, that show the break dancers in Nashville in 2015 performing when all the kids have to go to the stands, and when they have to go to the stands at Nashville, when there's lightning, when there's a storm, all the kids are rushing to the stands or rushing to their vehicles wherever we can get them safe. And they have nothing to see. The music stops, the show stops, and they wait for it to stop. So we ran out there on stage, and we go out and we stack bodies on top of bodies, and you get one guy going up, hands on, upside down on top of another guy, and the crowd's going wild. And we started to make our name by doing the break dancing and doing some of the graffiti art and doing some of the charity work out there, working with the nonprofits, working with Sierra, and doing ground level work.
That lifestyle stage went through Code of the Cuts, was Jamie, who worked with me in the beginning of the Warped Tour,
right,
who was involved in the hip-hop community and wanted to bring that there. So she was DJing and spinning and doing some stuff, and there was some freestyling going on. And then that went to the Bring It Back stage, which Fritz did for many years, and then it ended up as a Transform stage. So
this was a genre stage. There were many stages that had specific genres.
Not a ton, just a few. This was a lifestyle stage.
Right.
So we always had these kind of in the vein of Warped Tour, the Smartpunks, East Coast Independents, but sometimes a lifestyle stage would show up. We've touched on a lot of it, but there was a lot more side stages.
There was a lot of side stages.
And we have an upcoming episode where we had Shira over in our backyard hanging out talking about the SweaterGirl
really
stage.
Great.
And that's going to be coming up, and what she's doing now with Gritty and Pink and some of her other projects.
We're going to dedicate a whole episode to that one side stage.
Yes, absolutely. And I've got some artists who played, some of the female artists who played on that stage, as well as played on other stages that I was able to catch up with. So we had so much content that we had to do, break this into multiple episodes. Yeah. There's lots of stories here, and I'm going through all those texts that people have sent, and I may have to do a couple more interviews because some people have really reached out. But it almost destroyed the tour.
What? You're so proud of this.
I was, but when
it
got to that point in LA with 16 stages, and I mean that was like 140 bands.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that was Warped Tour was in a good spot when it was like 60 to 75 bands, 60 to 80 bands maybe. But once we were getting up over that 100, it was just you got to think they come in vehicles, they need passes. It was collapsing under its own success.
Logistical nightmare.
Well, everyone, it was just collapsing under its own success. It took there was not enough bathrooms backstage for these people. It was just the infrastructure wasn't.
It's a one-day deal, right? That's a lot for one day.
And we would pack up. So that's where I had to start saying no. I did have to start saying no to some people who would come to me and say, I want to bring a stage. I'd say, well, maybe I could team you up with someone, or maybe you can split a stage. Maybe you take the first half and someone does that. So we went through that phase a little bit, and we settled in. I'd say we settled in right around 10 stages. And that seemed like something we could manage.
Right. But I understand that there were some cases where, at that point, where you felt like it was logistically a little too hard and you had to say no. After you said no, were those folks that did it anyway?
We still had a lot of people, stuff, but I never said no to the parking lot. The parking lot was kind of a free-for-all.
Okay, well, that's good.
The parking lot was a free-for-all, and, but inside we definitely, people, I think some people were upset that I said, no, we can't do a stage. It was just interesting. People have been sending me stories about things on Warped Tour or things that affected their life. Not only were these bands playing side stages and everything, but they created some of their own stories that have stuck with them all their lives. And Dan emailed me the story that I'd like to read. It's from Dan Saxton. He says, in every city after we played, we would cruise around the festival with this device called a Discman and try to meet girls and sell our CDs. I was walking one way, and this girl was walking the other way, right towards me, and we locked eyes. She was so cute. As she walked by me, I told her she was beautiful, and she grabbed my hand and immediately started running towards the main stage. I ran with her and left my bandmates in the dust. We ended up in a huge crowd in the pit for Under Oath, in the middle center stage, and we immediately embraced and kissed, being surrounded by all these people. I think I even dipped her and kissed her. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, honestly. We started to get pulled from each other, and bodies were flying everywhere. It was so crazy and loud. I didn't even know her name yet. So I grabbed one of my band stickers out of my pocket and stretched out to put it in her pocket. And then she disappeared into the crowd as it just got crazier. I never thought I'd see her again. Then a few hours later, we were packing up our merch table, and someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was her. We spent the night together and dated for a year of punk rock bliss. Her name was Candy. Candy Apple, I call her. The end.
That's cool.
So you're sweating, you're putting up stages, you're breaking down, but there's still love in the air at the Rans Warped Tour.
That makes me feel so old. I want to be 22 and fall in love in front of a stage.
In a mosh pit.
Yeah.
Now we have to put up, signs in front of our house. Are you vaccinated? There's no love in the air right now.
Get off my lawn.
There's no lawn. There's no love in the air anymore.
Baseball? It's mine now. It's mine.
I go back to campus, and it's just even shaking people's hands. You're like,
I want to be 22 again. Well, that was fun.
So,
that's a fun show.
I think we're going to add a little segment here. We were talking about bands that we're kind of interested in.
I love this segment. Now, Kevin, I want to ask you. Look, you have had, for the last 25 years, the pulse on what was next. Or maybe it was a happy mistake or someone who's coming up. But there is no doubt a track record. Katy Perry, Eminem, no doubt. I mean, all these bands that came through your front door. So I wanted to start a segment, and I would say, hey, Kevin, what are you listening to now? Are you even in it now? Do you even care? Are you too busy teaching? Or do you still listen to bands? And if so, what are you listening to?
Well, there's so much on Spotify and so many things. But I was kind of like digging in when you said, hey, find, what was a band? I just heard that Less Than Jake and Newfound Glory and Hot Mulligan are going out on the road. And the opening act on that tour is Lolo. And I really think it's pretty cool. She's a female singer, and I think she's got a lot of talent. And as long as this tour can get out on the road, which is always a question mark these days, I think this could be one of those acts that gets a lot of traction. She's already getting a lot of listens on Spotify, but I think could be a nice breakout year.
All right, so all you kids out there, Mr. Kevin Lyman, who's picked winners his whole life, go check out Lolo. Okay, thank you to all of our guests for taking the time to come share their stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the listeners for making it this far.
And make sure that you subscribe on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube pages to know when new things are happening, because the shows are getting better and better. It's really fun.
And we just get, we've been doing this organically. And in any way you can help spread the word on this, I truly appreciate it. We're not paying anyone to market this. We're just doing it all ourselves organically. So if you can help spread the word, we truly appreciate it. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook to get yourself an interview and be on the show.
If you want to hear more from us or our guests, please subscribe to our Patreon to hear more exclusive content and get a discount on our merch. Plus, a subscription to My Warped Life might make that great gift for a friend, and it's only $5.
And now that I've been able to answer all those texts, keep them coming to 818-863-6445. That's 818-863-6445. And I think it's a wrap, Tony. And with the wrap, we want to thank our producer, Xavier Bradley, Vivian Wang, Beata Shemtov.
Beata's out there. It's a fun show. It makes me want to get a bunch of wood and build a stage and just put it out there next to a McDonald's and just crank open a big.
Well, there's a pile over in the corner over there, Tony. There's some tools in the shed.
We're going to start a band, and we're going to just set up in a parking lot in some obscure town in USA.
All right. And with that, take it away.
Take it away!
Diego!
Woo!